Okay.
Good morning, Professor Steve. Good morning, Judge Mel, Director Ma'am, all my faculty colleagues, and the students and other participants present here. Today, we'll be conducting a session on implicit bias, and the session will be conducted by Judge Mel. As Professor Steve mentioned earlier, that there's so many things that one can say about her as a person. There's so many roles that she takes up. Now, Professor Judge Mel Flanagan had served as a former county circuit judge, and she is also associated with University of Sarajevo and University of Wisconsin as adjunct professor. She is also associated with us, that is Institute of Law, Nirma University, as an adjunct professor. Judge Mel has served in the bench from 1993 to 2016. So for 23 years, she was playing the role of a judge, and she retired and to serve as a Fulbright scholar. Judge Mel has also been associated as a legal specialist with National Center for State Courts. Now, what I've been associated with her since the last few years, and as a person, what I have observed about her is the kind of energy and enthusiasm that she has, and the positivity with which she approaches all situations. Judge Mel, when we interact with you, when we associate with you, you've always been a source of inspiration to all of us. So I would like to welcome you once again and request you to carry on with your session. All the participants, I would request you that in case you have any query, please send it through a private chat to me, and we'll take it up during the last 15 minutes. Judge Mel, I request you to go ahead with the session, please.
Thank you very much for that very warm introduction. I appreciate it. And I'm very happy to be here. So good afternoon, everyone. Hello from Sarajevo, which is where I am at this time. And I'm thrilled that Nirma has made this opportunity for me to speak with you and for us to get together. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I am happy to be here. I'm here with a symbol that you probably recognize, the symbol of Lady Justice, and it's important to me. As a former prosecutor and judge, I've been in the court system my whole career, really, and now I'm more of an educator. But it's an important symbol of how important not just the practice of law and the study of law is, but justice. And she is a symbol which I kept on my bench the whole time I was acting as a full-time judge for 23 years, is the symbol of the strength of the court, which has to be tempered with balance and reason and equality. And the issue and the sight of her being blinded was a little troubling for me in the beginning, but it makes all the sense in the world, and that we have to be fair to every single person who walks in a courtroom. We have to be fair, and it can't matter if they are rich or poor, important and political or not, if they have no job at all. It doesn't matter what their race is, what their gender is. This is our job. So it's been an inspiration to have this to remind me in my position of what we're all here for. Today, I presume we have a lot of justice professionals in this audience, and professionals to be in the future. Students, professors, practitioners, and we all share this profession, or we will be sharing it shortly. And I hope that you feel, as I do, very proud to serve in this way. We serve our communities, and we dispense justice equally, fairly, and unbiased. And that's the process that we go through in order to make our courts credible and usable in our communities. If citizens didn't believe they had a place that they could go to be treated fairly, I don't know what would happen in terms of resolution of problems in each community. We need their support, we need their trust, and we must be sure not to abuse it. And it's a lot harder, those of you who are actual practitioners or have been in justice for a long time, than it looks. Some people say, well, what's the problem? There's facts, there's law, you throw them together, you get an answer. But then why are all the answers that we get in a court system very different? Even the judge right next door to me will answer something completely different than I will. It's not a simple process. It's quite interesting and quite complicated. One of the big complications is that our behavior is often not consistent with the goals that we hope to reach, our goals and our beliefs. And why is that? It's called implicit bias. And this is one of the reasons our goals and behaviors might be inconsistent. Not the only one, but it is certainly an important one. Implicit bias is the study of unconscious decisions that we make without knowing we're making them. It's not a conscious behavior. And sometimes our unconscious decisions or attitudes or beliefs are not helping us. They may be out of date. They may be inconsistent with what we actually believe and know. And that presents a real problem in our future. Now, when I talk about unconscious beliefs, you have to wonder, what is she talking about? I'm sure some of you have heard of implicit bias before, but some of you may not. And so I'm going to start at the beginning. And this is a picture of two lovely musicians with their cellos. And this little story that I'm about to tell you will give you an idea of what I mean by implicit bias. First of all, in around the early 1960s, there were a lot of women that were in the institutes for music all over the world. And they were exceptional musicians. They had been trained amazingly. They were now ready to perform and went looking for orchestras and symphonies to work in. And they auditioned with their peers and their male peers. And time after time, they were not receiving the jobs. They were not being hired by.
Is that two?
They were not being hired. Is there a problem, Kirby? No? Okay, I'm going to continue. Then, so what happens? The women, it was the early part of the more noisier part of the women's movement in the United States. And the women in the United States were saying, this is bias. It's gender bias. They're simply not hiring us because we're women. And what the symphonies answered, that's impossible. Why would we turn away a good musician if we had a choice between someone who is excellent and someone who is just okay? We want the excellent practitioner. We want the best music for our symphony, for our orchestra. And that was a pretty compelling argument. You have to agree, why would they turn that away? But some very enterprising researchers decided to test this situation and these theories. And they said, why don't we put up a curtain between the people who are reviewing and the people who are playing? Let's just put up a curtain. So you say in the symphony, you only listen to the music. Let's give you an opportunity to really do that. Only listen to the music and make your decisions based on the merit of the music. So they put up a curtain, and the auditions were always held in big auditoriums and for the best sound. And the big curtain comes down, covers the whole stage. And they even had the people who were auditioning take off their shoes so that when they walked across the stage, you didn't hear a clip, 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 clip of heels or the heavier sound of a male foot. They didn't want to give any impression about who was playing music. And guess what happened? Yeah, they were being accepted. They were being accepted in numbers that they had never been accepted before. Now, it's taken a long time for the music institutions to get women almost in parity. And in some orchestras, they are in parity, but it has worked. They broke down the gender barrier to hearing the music. And the the heads of the symphonies were amazed, ashamed, appalled. that they were actually rejecting people who were so good, and they couldn't, for some reason, they couldn't hear the music once they saw the gender. And they realized that that's what they were doing. The same thing could possibly, if this research was about gender, I'm sure that there were issues about race as well. But they now do it. It is the status quo is that they do blind auditions in music because there's no reason not to. There's no reason to take a chance of having some implicit, unintentional bias hurt the quality of the symphony. So this was a big step forward for a lot of people, but it brought to people's attention the issue about what is going on. How can we act against our best interests and not know we're doing it? An implicit bias is what it has been called, our implicit attitude in the science, in the research. There's a lot of neurobiological science and psychological science research that's been done on these attitudes and stereotypes, which are born in our past, but they still guide our personal and professional behaviors. Now, we've learned a lot around the table in our families, from our cousins, our immediate family, our in-laws, our grandparents, in our schools, in our religious classes, in our social activities. We learned a lot as children. And we learned it at a point where we couldn't test it. We couldn't say it was right or wrong and probably get in trouble if we said grandma or grandpa was wrong. We just listened and took it in, like so many things we take in as a child, to learn our way of how to live in the world. They guided us for good and for bad. There's a lot of good things we learn, but there are bad things that we learn too. Things that are not intentionally, they weren't intentionally bad, but they were misguided. They're no longer true if they were ever true. And we need to correct some of those scripts that we learned as a child from our family, in our culture, religion, education, life experience, and all the things that we know socially now that do affect us. Peers' opinions, music, literature, movie, advertising. Add to this the internet. We are bombarded with information from all sorts of sources, and we don't have the time or the energy or the facility to take it all in and review it carefully. So we need to be careful about what's going on in our lives now. Our history and our culture and our society have shaped who we are, even though we believe that's not true because we are so well educated, so careful, so thoughtful, so intellectual, smart, but we're human. And this whole process is a human process. It's not something that we can say, well, that's not me, because it is part of all of us. We all have biases, and that's not a bad thing. It has protected us, it's kept us safe, it's caused us to be who we are today. Now, a psychologist would tell you that this is in-group, out-group bias. That's one way of describing it in ways that people can understand. We are programmed genetically and historically to prefer the known and the familiar. If something has been tested, it's familiar to me, I understand it, I know what to do with it, I know how to handle it, I am more comfortable in that zone than something brand new, different, and a little frightening, could be scary. Where do we get these feelings? Think back historically. Historically, we were not the top of the world. We were not running everything. We were prey, and we weren't very good at our job there. I mean, we were not very fast. We couldn't outrun the animals that wanted to eat us. We weren't as smart as them at knowing how to get out of situations. We had a lot to learn to get to where we are today. So what we did is we banded together. There's safety in numbers. You've all heard that term before, safety in numbers. We could band together so that we could hunt effectively. We could band together so that we could protect ourselves better than one person against a bunch of animals coming after me, we could band together. We could put up protection, walls. We could make some safety together. We could grow things together. We could help each other, support each other. So we are social beings. We do need to be together, but we're social beings that have a very high level of suspicion about new things. Now, a lot of people have no problem with jumping into a new idea, going into a new culture, trying a new language, but that's not the norm. It's good, and it's something we should all learn, to be more open-minded and seek diversity, because it teaches us new ideas and shows us new ways of looking at the world. But our ancient brain, which the scientists would tell you, and I'm not a scientist, there's no doubt about that. Nobody has called me a scientist ever, but I've worked with lots of scientists on their research in terms of the court system and how the court systems work. And this is one area that I found in their area of research, which was particularly helpful to me and to people in the justice system. In fact, the ABA, the American Bar Association, has made this one of their #1 goals, is to have every single lawyer in the country of the United States well-trained in implicit bias. There's a reason for that. It makes us all better at our jobs, and it makes us more perfect. We're not perfect, but it makes us more perfect. So I support they're doing this because it's wonderful. But what we need to understand is that this is a picture that one of the scientists that I work with gave me, and he said this describes above the water what we're in charge of in our life, what our brain is actually aware of, what's going on. What we see below the water, that's the rest. Kind of like the computer that you're looking at today. We can see the screen, but we can't see how it all gets there the way we want it to be. We can't see the internet. There's so much behind what we see on the screen. But we have delegated a lot of authority, decision-making, and actions to our body and parts of our mind. Why? Why would we delegate all that? Well, if you think about it, if we had to think about how to breathe, how to walk, how to talk, how to make oxygen get to our brain, we can't be in charge of everything. We can't be in charge of everything. We would just like a computer, when you ask it to do too many things too fast, it just freezes up on you. Or maybe that's just me, but it does freeze up on me on occasion. And that's what we would be, frozen, because there's too much overload. The amount of data that we get in a day is overwhelming. The internet alone can become a disease. If you dive in and don't get off of it, it can become very, very difficult for you to live with. We need to do things with moderation, and we need to protect ourselves from all the things that we don't have to be in charge of, so that we can do incredible things. We can develop art, music, literature. We can find answers to diseases and even pandemics. We can get into the sky and fly to another planet. We can invent things that we don't even know about yet. That's because we can focus and we can come to conclusions and look at things deeply using our executive function brain right up here in front. That's where we do all the marvelous things, and we play games and do things not so marvelous. But the part of our brain that's taking care of a lot of the things that we have delegated is called the amygdala. And it's in the back of your brain, and it's right at the top of the spine. And it's one of the earliest sections of the brain that formed. It's kind of our dinosaur era brain. That's where our implicit bias and our childhood memories and all those things that we picked up early in life, that's where they sit, not in a real orderly fashion. It's not like our brain where we want to see things in order and they go straight through. It's kind of a jumble back there, but it is kind of our 911. When we get into trouble, it snaps in and it does what it needs to do so that you can respond effectively and efficiently and immediately. It has a very important function. And you can read all about these things, and I'm going to give you some ways to go to research this, because I am just repeating what I've learned. I'm not this, I haven't done any of this research myself, but I have found it to be incredibly helpful in being a member of the justice profession and doing the job that I think we all need to do as professionals in justice. So the in-group, out-group bias is very important, and we can see it more in terms of this, that we're not in charge of everything. That's kind of a scary idea. I mean, we all like to be the captain of our ship. We want to be in charge of what we do every day, and we think we are, until we find that there's things going on that are contrary to my own views today. You may have listened to your family talk about stay away from those people, stay away from that church, stay away from this, stay away from that. But you, as you've grown up, have learned that diversity and differences are wonderful and can be very important in your own development, in your own understanding of the world. So you don't have the same fear that they had. But somewhere in the back of your brain, it's still there. I have a quick story about this. Is a friend of mine teaches diversity training international to businesses all over the world. And this is important because international businesses understand you can't take a business from Ohio and stick it in Bangladesh and expect it to work, because that's not the culture there. If you want to work internationally, you have to understand the culture, you have to understand the people, and you have to let them teach you new ways of doing things. So this is what she does, is try and teach companies to work together when they are in diverse situations internationally. And she was getting on a plane, gets on the plane, she's walking past the front, she goes to her seat. Before she gets to her seat, something happens. She starts hyperventilating. She's sweating. She doesn't know what's going on, except she's in her mind, she's remembering this is what a stroke looks like. This is what a heart attack looks like. And she says, I have to sit down and collect myself. And she sits down and she takes a deep breath, which I honestly believe is the answer to most stress, is take a deep breath, and it comes to her. She understands what's happening. She's not having a heart attack. She's not having a stroke. She's having a panic attack, because when she looked into the cockpit of the plane, she saw there was a woman pilot. And it terrified her, not intellectually, emotionally, because there was that in the back of her mind, in her amygdala, saying, watch out, this is danger, it's a woman. And she was furious with herself, because she felt that her entire body was committed to her work and believed absolutely that women are equal and can do whatever they are skilled to do. And she couldn't believe that she had this stereotype and that it took hold of her body. But it was a good reminder that we're all human. Even though she does this every day, she still can be surprised and appalled that that's the decision that her body made. You're in trouble. So it's a reminder for all of us that we can be tricked by these memories that we don't actually hold on to very closely, but they affect our behavior and our responses. So the good thing is that in the search for how do we deal with this new area of concern, implicit bias, the research has created a test which can actually test your biases and identify them for you and measure them for you and give you ways to mitigate and control them. This is wonderful, because if you think about our business being in law and in justice, What's our only product? Our true only product is to bring justice and protect justice. And if we are not just in our own hearts and our own minds, we have a preference for this group or a attitude towards that group that we don't like, or a prejudice against this country or this religion, we're not doing our jobs. We're not being just. So that's a shocker. That's terrible. That's really kind of intimidating and scary. But we also know we can identify our biases. We can isolate them, just like the musicians did, by putting up a curtain or coming up with a system that will make us more perfect and just. Then this is wonderful. We have the tools to fix a very bad problem. And that's why the ABA and so many different groups are using this system to help their members be better at their jobs, which is justice. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how the test works. It's a test that I really hope that you'll all take. It's online. It is simple. You just need 2 fingers. It is done in dozens and dozens of languages. It's been, these tests have been run all over the world, millions of times. And it's very easy to do. It's confidential. Nobody knows what your biases are going to be. Nobody knows what kind of score you got on this test. It's just for you. It's for your use only. They use the results in their research, but it doesn't identify you. Nobody knows what your results are. So there's no reason not to do it. So when you take this test, you'll be asked to associate 2 concepts quickly, because they want to know what your quick answer is, what your brain is going to do comfortably. And they measure the time it takes you to answer with 2 fingers. And they measure it down to the millisecond, and that gives them evidence of when you get a little slower, there's something that is a little dragging in your thought process. You have to think harder to get the right answer, or to get perhaps the politically correct answer. So this is what we're going to do. I need everybody to unmute yourself. If you will do so, take the mute off, because for this test, I need to hear your voices. So I'll give you a moment to do that. Okay, now you're not muted. Now at this point, I'm going to turn to the next screen, and when you see it, there will be 3 columns on the screen: column 1, column 2, and column 3. In each column, there will be a list of words. The words you see, I want you to tell me the color the word is written in, and go through column 1, then column 2, and column 3. Tell me the color the word is written in. I don't care about the word. I care about the color the word is written in. So here we go. We're going to go to column 1. I need you to speak loudly so I can hear, and I need you to go fast. Column 1.
Yellow,
Yellow, red,
red,
blue,
green,
white,
green, pink, orange, red,
green, pink, orange,
yellow,
red,
blue,
white,
orange, red.
Good. Everybody passed. Everybody passed the test. But there's more to it. You knew that was going to happen. We're going to do the same thing again when I'm going to pass to the next screen, and you'll go column 1, column 2, column 3, and tell me the color that the word is written in. Everybody ready? Here we go.
Orange,
red,
white,
green, yellow,
blue, green, white, red.
purple,
Okay. I think we have enough.
green, red.
Now would you mute your yourself again, so we can get back to, or everybody can be muted by our help. Okay, thank you. Now, this is what, did you notice something different between the first and the second one? Now, in a in-person audience, I'd be letting you talk about this now, but we don't have that today, and we don't have that time. So I'm going to answer my own question. My guess is that you felt that kind of hiccup in your brain like, what am I supposed to do? Yeah, just a stutter in your brain and your processing. And that's the stutter that they look for in this test, because when you're comfortable with saying, yes, I like red and I like blue, that's no problem. But if you are not comfortable with red and blue, it gives you a little stutter, and that's the stutter. Obviously, if red is your favorite color or you can't stand red, it's not an issue. You can live with that bias. We have biases that don't affect other people's lives. That's okay. We allow those. We even think it's a good idea because we are all different. But if your bias is a bias so that someone might not get this job, they might not get this promotion, they might not get this scholarship, they might not get this education, then there is a problem with that. And when I talk about the justice system broadly, the justice system is anyone who makes decisions that affect other people's lives. And if those decisions are not just, then that's a lack of justice at any level of our communities. Now, this is the Project Implicit is where this work is collected. There are people doing work on this all over the world, but Project Implicit is a collection of all that work. And you can find it at implicit.harvard.edu. And I strongly recommend that you do so. This is where you can take the implicit attitude test or implicit bias test. It's called both things. And it will identify and measure your bias online, confidential, takes about 10, 15 minutes to do it. It is the first step to taking control over your own biases, taking control and controlling them so that they're not affecting or harming other people in the future. Now, sadly, but not surprisingly, the global consistent results are that the strongest biases on every single continent are race and gender. I don't think anybody should be too surprised about this. We can look at the world in history or currently, and many of the tragic outcomes that are currently ongoing have to do with race and gender, followed closely by religion. And that was also true in the results. Race and gender are the strongest. Religion, political ideology, and nationality come up right close to all of those. They can test whether you are, you prefer tall people to short people, or thin people to heavy people, or younger people to older people. I mean, they can test a lot of different biases on there, and it's kind of interesting to try that. But these are the big ones. These are the ones that are affecting so many people all over the world all the time. Now, in one point in my history as a judge, I was in charge of a group of judges that were doing just drug cases, drug either selling or using cases. And that was all we did all day long. It was a strong diet of drug cases. And that was about the time that a lot of research started coming out saying that Black Americans, Blacks in the United States, were being harshly sentenced for drug cases, much more harsh than people who were not Black. And that was a shocking, revelation. Nobody had really noticed it until the research came out. But if you looked, we would have seen it because their numbers were much higher in incarceration and still are not great in terms of the people incarcerated. So sometimes the evidence of our bias is right in front of us, but it's hard for us to see. And so we, as a group, decided to look at all of our statistics for 6 months about who we had sentenced. And we had to look at the age, the race, the education, the charge, and a history of charges. So we had 5 items that we would look at and put into columns, and we'd see where the differences were when we looked at the sentencing. And when we took out age, because you know, a group of in their low 20s would be looked at, and with a similar education and even the similar background criminally and a similar charge. The only difference came out was race. Race really was a problem. And the judges, just like the musicians and the heads of the symphony, said, no, I belong to so many different, you know, humanity groups, and I give money to this, and I work with children in the schools in the inner city, and I do so much to help, you know, the race issues in my town. It can't possibly be true that I would do that. But we do it because we don't know we're doing it. And we had to be confronted with the numbers in order to understand that something really is wrong here, and we are not dispensing justice well or adequately at all. In fact, we're hurting people. So what we did was consistent with the later research, actually, on how you control a bias, is you have to be aware of it, and then you have to be hyper aware when that bias could affect a decision. So that we wrote down every day all those categories, and we looked at every day and every week to see if race was jumping off the chart in any direction at all, like it had previously. And we pulled that back. We learned to control for the race issue, because if there's someone who is white or Latino and they have the same background and they're being treated differently than this Black defendant, we are the problem, not the defendant. So it's evidence that we can put up the curtain just like they did in the symphony, or create a system that will eliminate our implicit bias, because we're going to look at it very carefully and make sure it doesn't affect us in the future. This is a picture from January 6th in the United States at the Capitol, where a rally that was called by the then president, Mr. Trump, and became a chaotic battle between these people taking over the Capitol building and fighting the poor police, who were outnumbered 100 or 200 to 1 easy. There were thousands of people who stormed the Capitol, broke windows, broke doors, ransacked the interior and the offices. And there were threats to kill. There were threats to kill the Speaker of the House. There were threats to kill the Vice President. Most of these people were armed with something they could use. They were armed with real guns, real sticks, real knives, poles, all kinds of things. And it was a very violent situation that lasted far too long, but it also resulted in the death of 5 people. And it's a miracle it was only 5. It could have been much worse. But bias, whether explicit or implicit, can grow, and it is like a virus, and it can produce terrible outcomes. It can make people angry. It can make people hostile. It can make people violent. And that can affect a building, a city, and a country. We have to understand that this is something that needs to be examined and controlled and not allowed. And talking about explicit bias, the weeks before this, months before this, there were numerous marches in Washington about Black Lives Matter, about the police behavior towards Black citizens that was unacceptable and illegal. And they contained them, police contained them, they had military contain them, they broke up the groups, they arrested them, they used violence against them, and these were largely peaceful protests. These people from the very beginning said, we're not going to be peaceful, we're tearing the place down. And they walked right in and nobody really stopped them. There weren't enough people there to stop them, and there's no reason. When the Black Lives Matter group tried to walk towards the Capitol, they broke it all up and sent them all home or to jail. These people walked right up the steps, in the door and in the window, and nearly created a worse situation. So we have to remember that justice is fragile, that it has a results when we have a bias and we take the balance that we're supposed to protect and find in a courtroom or in any room, and we tip the scales for one group over another. It's not without impact on people's lives. We can see how it can affect justice with the Black drug defendants. We can see how it affects business if their business isn't going to function because they don't know how to integrate into a new area or a new culture, and it can affect education. And education can affect implicit bias because this is something we should be teaching our students to understand about their behavior. It's not enough to learn the law that's written in a book. You have to learn what's in your heart and what's in your mind that may not follow that law and may corrupt that law. So we have to identify who we are and how we got here and why we're here. We have to accept reality. We're all biased. It's not something terrible. It just means you're human. If you're not biased, you're probably from another planet. This is human. Some people more than others, but we all have biases. That's how we get through the world, and that's how we got to the position that we're in today. You identify your bias, take control of it, and then your behavior and your goals will match your goals and not impede one another. Develop opportunity systems that will guide us to less bias. There's all sorts of research about applications when people are applying for a job and they have a resume, and the resume starts at the top with their name, their gender. The name often in many languages tells an awful lot of information and categorizes them just by their name, but the gender is there, their nationality is often there. That doesn't have to be at the top of the resume. That can be blocked, and you can just look at the skills of each one of those applicants and make a decision on the objective needs that you have in your business or in your school or in your advanced education program, and pick people that are appropriate and don't use those categories. That's one way to do it. But we can also just share this information that we have with all our friends and our peers and our neighbors, and let them understand the importance of implicit bias and broaden my view and the worldview of everyone. There are positive directions. Black Lives Matter is a very important step forward on controlling the power and authority of police, who are determined and are required to serve and protect, but they often don't do that equally. This needs to be addressed, and it's not just an American issue, it's being done all over the world. MeToo movement, again, we don't protect everyone equally, especially women in domestic violence do not get the services, the assistance, and the support that they need. And offenders are often not held accountable for their behavior. We need to make this more just. There's campaigns to end domestic violence and sexual violence. And it's interesting to note that the research on domestic violence perpetrators is that they've grown up in a violent household. So their early childhood messages were, this is how you be a man. This is how you control your life, your family. This is how you grow up and mature. And those messages are detrimental to their lives and their relationships and their family's welfare now. But we're learning more and more about how we can address that, and that's good. Universities are looking for making space for women, safe spaces on their campuses all over the world, and opportunities for women students, staff, and faculty to rise up and do the best they can with their skills and their abilities. Women in Science Institute is in Wisconsin, doing the same type of work, and the international business diversity programs are amazing, and they are having a lot of effect. So there's a lot good going on there, but there can always be more. IAT is what we call the test, the implicit attitude test. It's a tool. And we are so lucky because we can see that this problem of implicit bias is interrupting and corrupting our best interests. Yet we have a tool to find it, take it aside, and defeat it. That's amazing. And support this among your colleagues and with your friends and in your community and in your institutions. This is where we want to go in the future. Now, I'm back to my good friend, Lady Justice, which, as I indicated, was a symbol for me to understand the dictates of my position and to be careful and deliberate in my decision-making and fair. But the interesting thing to me about this picture is these pictures, they're pictures of similar type women in, like this particular one, go back as far as Mesopotamia. These are some of the first pictures we can see in when civilization was coming together. And they are beautiful and they're so impactful. But this woman back in Mesopotamia, she had no justice. She had no property. She was the property of the men in her life. She had no money. She had no education. She had no justice. And for all the good reasons I say I like this picture, it reminds me that sometimes the injustice is right in front of us and we don't see it because we're so used to it. It's just become, oh yeah, that's Lady Justice or Lady Liberty. And when historically women did not have liberty and did not have justice and still do not in many countries. And even though countries have good laws on the books that tell us that everybody's equal, it doesn't work out that way a lot of the time. So I want to quote one of my students. I've been teaching the last 10 days in the program, and one of my students in a discussion yesterday made a comment, and you know who you are because you're out there listening. She said, "Justice is something people make happen." I thought that was lovely and so true, simple but true. We're the people. We're the people that have to make this happen. And if we don't, justice can disappear very quickly. It's very fragile. We have to protect justice, preserve justice, and make sure that we are, in fact, doing justice in our jobs. So I want to thank all of you for listening to me today, and I want to save a little bit of our time for some Q&A, but I also want to thank Nirma Institute for allowing us to do this today and allowing me to speak to all of you. And Dr. Shalini, who's been assisting me with the program, and of course, the Dean and the Director of Nirma Institute, Purvi Pokariel. I'm not really good with the name, you know that, but Pokariel, I think, Pokariel. Anyway, I want to thank her because she had the vision of starting this program once a year and bringing interesting people from all over the world to come and live with and learn from and assist her staff, her students, and her faculty. And this is just what I'm talking about. This is preserving justice. This is making sure that we all have a good handle on what we need to do and how we can help each other do it. So I want to thank her for her vision. It's just been wonderful to have this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judge Mel. I mean, it's an amazing to listen you as always. You know, when it comes to the implicit bias, you know, there is not much discussion and discourse in this area, especially amongst the legal professionals in India. But, you know, I can definitely bet that you made this implicit bias discourse very popular when it comes to the legal fraternity in India. So thank you so much. It's always pleasant listening to your views. And I completely in agreement with what Dr. Shalini said earlier, that you bring a different aura with whomsoever you interact. You know, you bring that positive vibes. You know, we all have had a very wonderful time with you on earlier occasions during your earlier visits, and we still cherish that memory. And I also acknowledge your kind consent to be with us as our adjunct professor at the Institute of Law. Had it not been this pandemic, probably we would have hosted you here for an entire semester, and we all would have a great learning experiences, while interacting with you on a diverse range of issues. Thank you so much. We are really grateful to you for being ready to take up this seminar, for agreeing to conduct a specially designed a course on art of advocacy. My students are really, really enjoying the interactions with you. Thank you so much. On behalf of all my students and faculty colleagues, and on behalf of the management, we are really grateful to you. Thank you, Judge Bell.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I look forward to when we're all back on campus and we can do this face to face.
Thank you, Judge Mel, for the wonderful insight regarding the topic. We have few questions with us. The first question that I'm going to take is from a faculty. She's asking that what is the difference between implicit bias and inherent bias? And how can one overcome inherent biases while carrying out observational or participatory research where she's interacting with other people? So how can she remove this biasness influencing the test result?
Okay, inherent bias is not a term that I'm particularly, I'm not sure we have the same definition of it, but let me say what I think it can be, is that biases can become part of our culture, and they can become embedded in our culture, and they can become embedded in institutions. And when they are, and we've grown up with them, and it's always been like that in my church or my school or my neighborhood or my city or in our legislatures, we don't see what's right in front of us. And it's very hard to get people to understand that this is a bias and that this is not what is correct under the law, and it's not correct for the people that are being affected by it. I think the best we can do is understand that there are inherent biases. I think that when we took on the drug problem with Black Americans in my court in one city, we found it was basically an institutionalized that this is how we're going to handle these cases. And we thought we were being objective, but then we have to test somehow whether our belief that this is an objective, our cultural way of doing things. Culture can also be a way of excusing bias and accepting bias and not dealing with bias because it's our culture. It's our culture. And that's, we have to kind of put the light on the situation and see how it's affecting whatever group is most affected by that bias, and then bring that to the forefront and see how we could do things differently. It's a big question. You're right.
The second question says that this is from a student. He says that he understands the importance of implicit bias, like awareness about implicit bias with regards to people who will be justice providers in future. But he asked that how do I address or mitigate the bias?
Okay.
Like if I know I have a bias, how do I address it?
Okay. Well, you have to slow down. One of the things the research tells us is that if we make quick decisions, they're not well thought out, which is obvious. But we're so, we basically think that we're so well trained in what we're doing and we're so good at our job, we can do it fast. And part of the problem in the court system and justice system, academia, is we have a lot of work to do. So we work faster and faster, and I'll come in, I'll have a stack of orders that have to be signed that could be a foot high, and I need to go through those because the whole courtroom's out there waiting for me and they all want to get back to their lives. And so so this looks good, this looks good, this looks good, but I'm not carefully reviewing things. And there are decisions in there that are going to affect people's lives. And that is not fair to them. we have to slow things down. We have to take more time. We have to look at the situation and say, now I know I have a problem with women being in science. I prefer they be in other fields. And I'm looking at grants for science students. And I'm not going to be, there's a tendency not to be fair when I'm figuring out who's going to get these grants. So I need to slow down and look at their merits and make my decision on the merits. Slowing down and forcing your, executive function brain to look at the situation and not letting our dinosaur brain make these decisions is the first start. Slow down, accept that you have an issue here. So look at the merits and see whether you can do it. Or you can do blind things. Take the names off, take the nationality off, take the religion off, take things out that are not important in this decision, but are affecting the decision, and make your decision based on just the merits of what's in front of you, and not have that information if you don't trust yourself not to be affected by it. So we have to devise systems, just like the curtain. The curtain is a system. We divide systems that help us do a better job. And as I said, they're still doing that in symphonies and orchestras today because they don't trust themselves to drop the curtain and still do a good job. So then do it with a curtain of some sort.
Yeah, I'll take the next two questions together. The first person, he says that many people in India, they will not be ready to correct their bias. So how do we motivate them or encourage them to be bias free or work on their biases? And the second question is that the test that the IIT test, it shows category as European Americans and African Americans. Now, for Indians, we might not have that kind of a bias. So is there any other test which takes into account the Eastern religions and races also?
Okay. I think that the bias of at least race and gender has been determined to be pretty prominent on every continent, and the research does include India, as far as I know. And I just think that is just so basic human that it's hard to imagine any area that doesn't have some degree of it. But how do you address people that don't want to deal with it? I don't know. I mean, first of all, for me, it's often addressing people get them to try and see if they have biases. They may not think they do, but if you can get them to take a test and take a look at this, or you can confront them with the records, which we did in the court, that showed an absolutely indefensible bias, you can help move them closer to understanding how this happens, and not accusing them of doing things intentionally, because you're going to lose your audience real fast at that point, but understanding that it is unintentional and that you expect that they have the best intentions of being fair. And if we can help them be more fair, this is a positive thing for them to see. So it's a discussion that we need to have with our friends and family. People who have strong explicit biases are not as easy to address, but we still try. But implicit biases are usually with people that don't know they're doing this. And if it can be revealed to them in a non-judgmental way, they might come along. Or as I tell my students, you can plant the seed by talking about it. And maybe they're not prepared to take that seed now, but it might grow in the future. And they may then decide 6 months from now or a year from now, maybe there was something to that conversation. Maybe I need to look into it. We can just guide people. We can't force it.
We'll just take this one last question. I'm again combining two questions together. The first person says that, is there a thin line of difference between stereotyping and implicit bias? And the second person says that when somebody is being biased against us, should we, and if yes, then how we can check ourselves from doing the same?
Okay, that's a lot of questions in there, but I'll do my best. Stereotyping is a particular type of bias. Implicit bias can include many different types of bias. You don't like broccoli. That's not a problem. It's not a stereotype. You just don't like broccoli. I mean, you have a very clear feeling about something. But stereotyping is predetermining who a person is and what they're like and what you can expect from them. That's not fair, because you can take a person out of any culture, any religion, any place in the world, and you cannot determine who that person is going to be or what they feel or what they're going to do or how they look at the world. We are so diverse within a culture, and all the different cultures are diverse. So to say that every Italian is the same, every Bangladeshi is the same, everybody from Sweden is the same, is just pitiful, because it's so far off. We can laugh at their food, things like that. We're not without humor, but the way a person dresses, the way a person speaks, the way what they eat or what they believe in their religion, it doesn't determine everything about them. We need to look at each person as an independent individual. And I tell you, it's really hard. And it's hard to get judges to see this, because they see so many people walk into the courtroom who look just like the person they just talked to yesterday and last week. I can tell by the way he's walking and the way he's dressed. I know who this guy is. And that they don't even do that consciously, but once they do that, they've now shut off the ability to give this person justice, because they're using stereotypes. So stereotypes are usually about, the characteristics of certain types of people. And that's different than other biases. I'm not sure what the rest of the question was. What did I miss?
No, you have addressed the question, Judge
Okay.
Mel. There's this one more student who writes that there are studies that exist out there which basically validates or affirms these biases. So how can one try to convince people who use such studies as a way to support their rather orthodox belief? So if somebody is validating these biases, how can one convince these people not to use such studies to support their orthodox belief?
Well, it's interesting. When I first came to Europe and I started teaching here, and I was teaching in many different countries and in Africa and different places, I was teaching about domestic violence primarily. And I would, when I would say, I'm here to talk about domestic violence, and what do you think about domestic violence? I'm not making any conclusions or expectations about what they think. I would just say, what do you think? Is it a problem here? And people would every single time answer, oh, no, it's really not a problem here. Our culture, we don't have that problem. That's an American problem. And I got that answer every single time. And then I would say, okay, next week when you come back to class, before then, I want you just to talk to people in the community. Ask your friends, your family, your neighbors. Ask them if they know anything about domestic violence, because you have a class with this American teacher and you want to come in and say you know something about domestic violence and look good before the teacher. So give me some ideas, because I really don't know anything about this. I said, do not ask anybody if they're a victim. Just ask them if they know anything about domestic violence. And every single time, the next week when they would come back to class, they would be a totally different group of people. And they would have a list: my cousin, my aunt, my brother, his girlfriend's parents. They said, everybody I talk to knows someone who has had a terrible time because of domestic violence. How come I don't know about this? These are people I live closely with, and I know. How come I didn't know they were having these problems? And I would tell them, that's why we're going to spend this class talking about domestic violence, because it's invisible. We're so used to not seeing it that we don't see what's right in front of our eyes. So sometimes you just have to get people to look for some of the information that you want to talk to them about. And when they can find it in their own life, you can talk about, how are we going to deal with this? We humans, how are we going to deal with it? So it's not me talking to them and telling them how to handle their own problems. It's, let's have a discussion. And that's what you want to do. A discussion opens people's minds. is my students will tell you, I'm not really strong on lecturing at people because I want to have a discussion all the time. So that's one way. It helps. And using implicit bias as a door opener. When I talk to judges, don't tell them I said this, but they all think they know everything. Okay, they're really hard to teach. So when I talk to judges, I don't say, I'm here to teach you to be a better judge, because they'll all get up and walk out of the room. What I talk about is, there's this thing called implicit bias that helps me, and I think it might help you. Let's talk about it. And then we look at the problems in their community as shared problems. How can we all come up with a way to address them? So implicit bias is a great way to open a conversation.
Thank you, Judge Mel. I would now request a student of semester 1, Alicia Vyas, to deliver the vote of thanks. Alicia. Unmute yourself, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion of International Teaching Month. I, on behalf of the Institute of Law and Nirma University, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to Judge Mel Flanagan for profoundly enlightening us with her knowledge and wisdom. This lecture has given all of us deep insights into implicit bias in justice and given certain interesting facts about the same. I would also like to express my gratitude and thank our Dean, Mrs. Purvi Pokhriyal, Dr. Shalini S., and all the other professors for organizing this lecture. Thank you to all the students present here for paying attention and asking questions, which helped us in understanding the topic more critically. We thank you all for being here, present with us this afternoon. It has been a very great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
With this, we will wind up the session. Judge Mel, I'm so looking forward to your next visit here. I think I forgot to mention to the student that there is a self-defense class that Judge Mel has conducted a couple of times. I have unfortunately not been able to attend the same. So I'm looking forward to the next session. So you'll find me there as a participant. So hope to see you soon in the campus, Judge Mel. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. And
yeah, thank you, Professor Steve.